6.6 special quadrilaterals. Uh, so we've been talking a lot about quadrilaterals. Now we're going to just tie it all together. And here's a really useful organizer to show this, okay? So this is just a diagram showing that here's quadrilaterals, and we can split these into three types of quadrilaterals. There's kites, parallelograms, and trapezoids. And each one of these things we know a lot about. From parallelograms, in the first few sections, we split parallelograms then into rhombus and rectangle. And those, when it's both a rhombus and a rectangle, we came up with a square. Now, a trapezoid, the third thing, a trapezoid could also be an isosceles trapezoid. So there's more theorems and things that we talked about here. And now there could also be other types of other quadrilaterals, any kind of quadrilateral, but these are the ones that are special that we're focusing on. So in general, a quadrilateral we know two things. Okay, the number of sides has 4 sides, and we also know that the sum of the angles is 360 degrees. So from that quadrilaterals, down the middle, we had parallelograms. So for any parallelogram, we know 5 things. That their opposite sides are parallel, and that was just by definition. Their opposite sides are also congruent, and I think in the future I'm going to be using the congruent sign for that. Their diagonals bisect each other. The opposite angles are congruent, and consecutive angles are supplementary. Now, a rhombus, all this stuff up here is true. Opposite sides are parallel and congruent, bisected. So all that is true, but there's 3 extra things. Okay, the sides are all congruent. The diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, diagonals are perpendicular, and the diagonals also bisect the angles. Okay, so a rectangle, angles are all right angles, and the diagonals are congruent. The diagonals are the same length. And now a square, all this stuff up here is true for a square. For a kite, so I took out the parallelogram down in the middle. A kite, the consecutive sides are congruent. Those are the sides that are next to each other. Opposite sides are not congruent. Okay, they can't be the same. One pair, a pair of opposite angles are congruent. The other pair is not. And the diagonals are perpendicular, very similar to a rhombus, except for this thing right here. This is what makes it a kite, not a rhombus. A trapezoid, exactly one pair of opposite sides are parallel. And then an isosceles triangle, the legs are congruent, diagonals are congruent, and the base angles are congruent. So here's a little interactive thing. It's GeoGebra that I'm using, but I can click on one of these points and I can move it around. And so I should have changed maybe the color on the outside quadrilateral. This is a midpoint. These are the midpoints of the sides of the quadrilateral. And so far we've stuck to convex quadrilaterals, but even if I go to a concave quadrilateral here, what do we notice about the connection of the midpoints? It's not just always a rectangle. It could be a rectangle, but in general it is a parallelogram. The midpoints of a quadrilateral form a parallelogram. Okay. There's your homework. We'll be talking about that, working on that in class. So if you got any questions on this lecture, make sure you write them down and ask me.